Maskagro, Maskofi from our side, well, at least from my side, هنا في Maryland. صباح الخير, السلام عليكم, مساء الخير, good afternoon, bon après-midi, wherever you are in the world. Welcome for joining us. Thank you for joining Nubia Fest 2020. We're very excited to have you with us on this panel, on this last day. This panel is the first for today, and it's about to start a jam-packed day of events and panels. And we have with us the great and active Minna Agha, who's been participating in the panels between the moving and the teaching and the mothering and everything great you're doing. Minna, thank you so much for joining us. Family, wherever you're tuning in from, put in the comments your name, say hello or peace in your language or in the language of the country you're in right now, and tell us what you know about, dare I say, Nubian architecture, and Minna will give us a glimpse. Minna, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you, Dima, for giving me this platform. This question has been coming up on academic, avenues, or on Facebook, just around our people. And it's never enough time to speak about it. And if I need to discuss it, I need 10,000 words, 25 pages of text to just unfold the question of Nubian architecture. But I would like to start the debate here. If you don't mind, if we have lots of Arabic speakers watching, I don't mind alternating between English and Arabic. This is a question that is important to those who are studying architecture or archaeology, perhaps of interest, to people who are studying architecture or archaeology, but it's also such an important standing point or a point of contemplation for us Nubians about who we are and what we do and who actually defines us and what defines us.
Absolutely. If you can repeat that in Arabic, command, just in case they would like, let us know in the comments if you would prefer Arabic or English or a mix of both.
انا هقول لك انا هحاول اتكلم من غير ما اكون ممله. هحاول اقول اتليست المضمون في اللي انا بقوله ما بين العربي والانجليزي. انا النهارده عايزه اتكلم معاكم عن مشكله ومساله العماره النوبيه كشيء احنا كنوبيين، احنا نفسنا كنوبيين مش عارفين ايه هو، وبنقع في افخاخ كتير جدا. وعايزه اتكلم عليه برضو كمشكله فيها السؤال يعني ايه نوبي اصلا؟ هو النوبي ده شكله ايه؟ بيعمل ايه؟ هو ايه اللي بيخلي حاجه نوبي اساسا؟ ايه اللي يقول الكوبايه دي نوبي بس الكوبايه دي مش نوبي؟ ايه اللي يخلي العماره دي نوبي والعماره دي مش نوبي؟ طبعا زي ما كنا بنتكلم امبارح في السبويلرز في المقدمه بتاعت النهارده، لانه المفروض السيشن دي كانت تحصل امبارح وما حصلتش.
عديها عديها، لا ولا let it go.
I also my fault برضه مشكلتي. ايه هي لو في حد عايز اجابه محدده لسؤال، لو سؤال ايه هي العماره النوبيه ده لما بتساله وبيكون السائل عايز اجابه محدده، كل اللي بقدر افكر فيه هو ده سؤال غبي. This is a stupid question to ask what is Nubian architecture. Give me an example of what are the parameters on which we say this is Nubian architecture. And usually they were asking for physical features. عادة اللي بيسأل بيبقى عايز شكل. ايه الاشكال اللي انا لو شفتها اعرف ان ده عمارة نوبية؟ يعني they always need a form, they need a shape. فأنا النهارده هتكلم معاكم شوية من وجهة نظري. أنا معمارية، تدريبي معماري، يعني دخلت الجامعة درست عمارة وعملت ماجستير وعملت دكتوراه في العمارة. والرسالة بتاعتي دي كانت عن دي كل تايتل كانت عن العمارة والعمارة العمارة as hegemony والعمارة as subtle resistance في العمارة كهيمنة والعمارة مقاومة مستخبية في قرى التهجير عندنا في displacement villages في مصر. أنا عارفة إنه في اختلافات كتير لو أنت متهجر في السودان، أو لو النوبيين السودانيين أو النوبيين في كينيا أو النوبيين في أي حتة تانية ممكن يحسوا إن في اختلافات في الشكل، بس إحنا هنلاقي إن الصراع نفسه متشابه جدا. صراع القوة ما بين حد عايزني أدوب وأنضم لشعائر ناس تانية وأبقى حاجة تانية and just to dissolve and not be there and to make sure just join the Egyptian nationality, just be Egyptian or just be Sudanese, you know. It's which also falls into the debate over the Kindaka. It's ours because they own Nubia within that debate is owned by the larger Sudan, and it's exactly the same thing for us. Nubia is owned by Egypt. So anything
or Kenya or what, wherever we're assimilated, so wherever the wind has taken us.
Nubian heritage is a subset of ancient Egyptian heritage, which is the question of Egyptology in general. But it's always this idea of Nubia being the baby brother of Egypt that always listens and sits quietly until asked to speak or dance or entertain. So, and Nubian architecture is requested to do the same thing. So let me share my screen. خليني كده أشير الشاشة عندي و show you the presentation. I'm gonna here. I'm going to make this bigger.
As you do that, as Minna prepares and puts the presentation على الشاشة, this is an interactive presentation. فلو في أي وقت أو في أي slide you have a question عندك أو عندك سؤال أو استفسار أو comment حتى رد فعل, please اكتبوه في comments, write it in the comments, and I will make sure to pass it on to Minna لأن هي she will not be able to see the comments وهي while she's doing the screen. As she works on the screen, she can't see the comments as they come, but I will be sure to let her. In fact, she made sure to let me know she didn't want to have it on a full screen so she can see your comments. This is 1000% an interactive session, so please feel free to have questions, interrupt, give your feedback as we move forward. And
feel free to fight with me. Feel free to disagree. I have been getting this fight for a long time. So here is the thing. Let me start with a stupid ass story that I do every day on Facebook. Every day on Facebook, somebody shares an image and says, look how amazing our architecture is. Nubia, the heritage. Nubia الحضارة, نوبة الحضارة, نوبة التاريخ, عمارتنا العظيمة. وفي الصورة بتبقى حاجة من الصور اللي قدامكم دي. عادة images يعني اللي قدامكم دوت نتيجة جوجل search image لكلمة Nubian architecture. So if you go on Google and type Nubian architecture, something like this is going to happen. Of course, with the change of usage. So if you're an academic like myself, you'll get a lot of ResearchGate and some other, you know, academic oriented. But if you, in general, you're going to have all these classics, the Nubian hotels in Aswan, the upper left side one, which is an hotel in Hurghada, a bunch of churches from Cairo, a bunch of Hassan Fathi's work, and so on. and with a random piece from an actual Nubian house in Ishkit or in somewhere in Sudan, as the only places now with actual Nubian architecture are going to be found in Sudan. Of course, in Egypt there are so many astonishing examples, but we have been hit hard. The Nubian land within the Egyptian border has been almost entirely displaced. So every Egyptian Nubian is now displaced. So even worse, when we go into Google and type Nubian house, you'll see this. This, to me, is a Nubian woman who grew up in her village, or at least has been attached always to her village, has been researching this topic for, I don't know, 2 decades now. Is this would be the epitome of epistemic violence. These images, most of them, all these colors to me look clownish. These are designs made by an Egyptian architect, and by Egyptian we refer in Egypt to everybody who is from the city. أي حد من الحضر بنقول عليه مصري. فمعماري مصري راح قرية جميلة اسمها غرب سهيل وبنى فندق صغير وسماه أناكاتو بالنوبي ولونه الألوان دي كلها على إنه شكل من أشكال العمارة النوبية. الفندق ده نجح جدا والمصريين جم والخواجات جم, and the foreigners in the tourism was flourishing in this hotel, and he made a lot of money, so he expanded into 2 or 3 more houses. Same idea, bring in العامل اللي بيعرف يبني قبة بأبو, اديله, give him a design, اديله الديزاين اللي انت عامله واعمل الحاجات دي كلها. But here's the thing, none of these shapes are actually indigenous or Nubian. Oh, I have to apologize everybody if you have any back noise. معلش انا اسفه من الاصوات اللي جايه من حواليا, لانه بحر هنا عامله لنا مشاكل. بحر ان شاء الله هتشاركنا دي بنتي عندها 4 سنين, هتشاركنا كمان شويه اكيد. فالبيت دوت او المكان دوت هو بيت واحد في حته واحده, has been taken over the image of what is Nubian, or at least what is Nubian in architecture. I'm not saying it's not pretty, I'm not saying it's not successful, but it's not Nubian. However, because it has been so successful and it has been serving an economic purpose, Nubians are starting to share it as an example of the greatness of Nubian architecture. حتى مع انه كل الحاجات دي almost معروفه لكل الناس, مش كل الناس بس كل الناس عارفه انه ده مش واحد نوبي اللي عامل المكان دوت, بس لان كل الناس, لانه الناراتيف او الحدوته في مصر بقت ان البيت دوت حاجه عظيمه واليا سلام النوبه وجمال النوبه, فاحنا كمان كانوا عمالين نعمل شير للصور دي ونقول بص جمال البيت النوبي وعظمه التاريخ النوبي والكلام ده كله. الحاجات دي كلها صعبه, يعني are very damaging. يعني الحاجات دي كلها مش صحيه ابدا على منظومتنا احنا في انتاج المكان, لانه اول حاجه احنا ما بنكسبش من المكان دوت غير الفتات. الناس النوبيين اللي شغالين في المكان ده شغالين بالاجر, الربح, revenue, all the revenue out of this kind of establishments go to Cairo to the investors, while Nubians work there for salaries. They don't really accumulate wealth out of it. On the other side, our production of visuals, our production of shapes is now governed by what the Egyptian imagination of Nubia is. And if you haven't, please go now and watch Dua's presentation on Nubian representation in media and look at her notes on film Mafia, the movie Mafia, and how the Egyptian imaginary has been formulating and boxing what Nubia is and what is Nubian for so long. And if you don't fit into that imaginary, you don't get to make money. You don't get to make wealth. So we kind of fit into that. What scares me, however, is when we believe it, when we believe that this is Nubian architecture. And I'll tell you why. Here is Gharbet Hill almost 20 years ago when I used to go and do my field work. It was white. The entire village was white, except for the center of it where they had these drawings of that are inspired by the Egyptian cartoon Bakar, because the center was sometimes an attractive area for tourists, Egyptian tourists, to come in and do some shopping and so on. So to somehow represent things that they know, they started to do all these wall drawings on inspired by this Bakar movie. Again, this kind of movie or this kind of cartoon animation was designed by an Egyptian woman. It was illustrated by an Egyptian woman, and the story is told by an Egyptian woman. Nubian voices, as far as I know, maybe I'm wrong, were not involved into the making of it. It was a way to have this fantasized idea of the Nubian kid who is Egyptian. And for me, this is not
Can I interrupt here? Yeah. Sorry, can I interrupt here? Nubian voices were involved in the making of this. It was the Nubian voice that is unfortunately referred to now as the king. In my personal opinion, it is very unfortunate. Muhammad Munir.
That's a theme song.
The theme song.
No,
yeah, the theme song. But it has become the voice of Bakar.
I mean the story of... So Bakar had stories in it. So Bakar, in a very weird timeline, so Bakar was contemporary, but his father died in 1973 in the October War.
But like continuity in the narrative is not.
And he had a goat, and so I mean the story, not the Nubian voice. I mean, well, Muhammad Munir is a performer. Oh my God, Hamza. Oh my, okay.
You want to go back?
No, we're moving. Sorry, guys. I guess I mean, so Nubian voices, I mean in weaving the narrative of Bakar, weaving the in the idea of Bakar. What is Bakar, what he's doing, what is his identity, because this became the representation of what is Nubian. Every single Nubian kid in that time was called Bakar in school.
Until now, when my friend Kamal came to we met in Luxor, and then later we went to we met in Cairo. Allah عادي Bakar.
Yeah, but حتى الأغنية اللي محمد منير بيغنيها as a citer، فاهمة؟ اللي كتبها مش حد نوبي، اللي كتبها ست مصرية. وأنا مش بقول حاجة إنه I am not trying to raise a nationalist approach, because I think the nation state is going to be futile in the next 100 years with internet and all these complex territories coming up.
أروى عثمان بتقول لك even girls are called Bakar.
Yes. ايوه يا اروى، وانا كمان والله كانوا بيقولوا لي كده، كانوا بيقولوا عليا بكار في المدرسه، اللي هو منين؟
يا بكار يا سماره.
الفكره كمان انه بكار was an upgrade, because before that we were being called some really offensive slangs and some really offensive words. We were being labeled in some really offensive ways. Again, go take a look at Dua's presentation on
yes, Nubia in the media. It's actually on one of our channels. It is the most popular. Like there's one for the Nubia Initiative and one for the Nubia Fest. The one on Nubia, it is the most popular panel and session that was held at Nubia Fest, and this should tell you something. أروى بتقول لك رشيدة. بتقول لك ايه بكار اور رشيدة. أروى are you in Zanzibar؟ انت كاتبه نوبيا فيست زانزبار. are you in Zanzibar؟ لانه انا حقا يعني هتصرف باراشوت ونجي لك على طول. we have Hisham Saleh Ahmed from tuning in from UAE, Sultan Mustafa Mahmoud from Kenya, Brian Smith saying good morning from Chicago, Shamim Nassar saying this is very interesting. Welcome all. Please engage in this very, very important conversation. Minna, sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to clarify, when you say Nubian voices were not present in the making of this, you mean the narrative, the Nubian narrative itself.
The narrative, the story of the identity.
They will always bring someone. They will always have a Nubian present as the token seal of approval.
No, I don't care. I don't really count tokenizations, and I don't count informants. I am talking about an actual an integrity evaluated kind of voice, an effective voice. So there were all these narratives about us are always written without us, and this is also what is happening to architecture now. All the narratives about us are being written without us there.
Yeah.
So this brings us, by the way, to this going from this is literally, to me, clownish. As a scholar of Nubian architecture, and I am sure those who have been looking into archaeology or studying early 19th century, early 20th century Nubian architecture would have a similar idea on what it was, but I dare you, none of our houses had all these kind of colors. First of all, because colors came out of the mountains, so these colors were not available at time. Second of all, color had a reason. Do you know why these houses are white? Because it's so damn hot, and white reflects heat. So there is a brilliance to this being white. And this is village. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Can you
yeah. We can hear you. We have just a few more comments. Arwa بتقول لك, I think one of the artists in Bakkar was Nubian. His name was Muhammad Dandarawi. Az-Zumri Khali says Maskagilo. Nubian Souk says proudly Nubian. Yes. Akh Abdurrahman, I think he wrote in Nubian again, which I cannot read on my screen. If you can, please, لو تقدر أخ عبد الرحمن تكتب لنا بالعربي بس يعني مؤقت لغاية ما يكون عندنا جهاز يعرف يقرأ باللغة النوبية. أكون شاكرة. شكرا. Arwa says yes, go ahead, please. We can hear you. They can all hear you.
I did not know, but that's what I mean is the story, the meta narrative, the narrative of Bakkar. They can always hire somebody to do something, but I mean the narrative. What is Bakkar, as far as I know, and maybe I don't know enough, was Mona Abu Nasr's. Is that her name? I think. Yeah, the director's idea, which is, I don't think she had a bad intention, but this idea of claiming Nubia to be Egyptian while not just accepting the fact that there are parallel histories, conjoined histories, and parallel histories again, not and not forcing us to just dissolve into an Egyptian identity, because you know what, we have Sudanese cousins, and literally cousins, first degree blood cousins, that were separated by the line between Egypt and Sudan in the 50s, right? So it's, to us, the nation state itself is counterproductive. So I am not really bothered by this idea, are you Egyptian, are you, do you think Nubians should be loyal Egyptians or not? Of course, we live in a community and we want to be in a great harmony and work for the larger good for Egyptians and for Sudanese and for everybody there. But the question here is that there is a peoplehood that has been displaced and dispossessed of meaning in as a person in this kind of peoplehood, and as a person who is trying to people, I am now trying to point out why this is very damaging for us and for our strive to reclaim the technology of self, the technology of self-making. So this, let me then segue from this into this idea of Nubian wall drawings, okay? Nubian architecture is going to be stereotypically associated with wall decorations. And there are lots of books on it. And when we're finished with this presentation, if there are questions, I'll just pull books and show you more images. This is an actual Nubian house. And looking at the art or the practice of house decorations, I would say you'll find an authority in Armgard Gograuer's work. She is a German anthropologist who lived with Nubians for 4 years and got displaced with Nubians. She speaks Nubian, and she would tell you, as a person who traced this before the 60s and after the 60s, it was a relatively new art, especially in the northern part of Nubia. It has so many styles, and it has a very significant meaning, and it has a varying technique from a village to another. It's not just that you go somewhere and draw something and that's Nubian architecture. And even if you do that, so why do you draw it? What kind of meaning are you trying to portray? So the difference between me drawing something for other people or me drawing something to elevate and assert and represent my own structure of meaning. Okay, let me then go, and as I told you, in my trial to not make this academic, it ended up being a bit scattered. So I'm gonna jump from a topic to another, and I have so many things that I'm mad about. So معلش انا حاولت اخلي البرزنتيشن دي يعني بعيدة عن الأكاديمية على قد ما أقدر، وعشان أعمل كده وأنا بعمل كده تقريبا الدنيا بقت مش منظمة خالص، فهتسامحوني. انا هقعد انط من نقطه لنقطه لان انا شايله في قلبي كتير جدا من زمان. So خليني اروح نقطه الديسبليسمنت. ماشي، دي بلدنا، دي جوستل، ماشي، بيت جدتي قدام، مفيش بوينتر هنا بس يعني somewhere في في السادس شارع من قدام كده. احنا كبرنا هناك، كل سنة قضينا الصيف هناك، اتحرقنا في عز الصيف هناك، أعيادنا هناك، ومع ذلك احنا عارفين انه دي مش بلدنا. احنا بنكبر واحنا عارفين احنا بلدنا دي اتهجرنا منها زمان. بصي الكلمة، احنا بلدنا اتهجرنا منها. انا واحدة اتولدت في الثمانينات، الناس اتهجرت في الستينات، بس الموضوع ده مهم جدا عشان كده جدتي قالت لي، وانا متاكده انه كل الحبوبات اللي في حلفه قالوا لعيالهم واحفادهم دي مش بلدنا، احنا بلدنا كانت جنه ربنا على الارض ودي مش بلدنا. فبالتالي يطلع جينيريشن زينا كده متهجر من مكان عمره ما شافه. يعني انت اتقلعتي من ارض بس انت عمرك ما كنتي فيها فيزيكالي اصلا. We are displaced from where we have never been. So so looking into the study of Nubian, when everybody is so mesmerized or so fantasized and fetishizing over all the drawings in Gharbis Hale and trying to redefine, and everybody, I mean Egyptian academia. That's when I started doing research to begin with. It was the question of displacement that was really occupying me. So what does architecture do in the process of displacement? And to be honest, working on this, I can see the role of architecture as a tool of hegemony. architecture itself as a tool of governance and control. Let me show you. So just for those of you who don't know, on our, at least to the north of the Nile, what happened is that Nubians did not just get displaced by the high dam in the 60s. We have been having dams and floods since 1903. People would wake up in the middle of the night with water all over their houses. It was a human catastrophe. And sometimes they did not know that this might happen. So we have stories that are documented from the 1933 displacement of horrors that really remind me of what is happening in Sudan now. This idea of water going into the mountain and bringing in scorpions and snakes. القصص بتاعت جدي عن جدته وعن أمه لتهجير 33 أو طوفان 33. التهجير كان في الناس اللي في الشمال معظمهم كنوز اللي اتهجروا. أنا فديتشا. فازاي انه الطوفان جه بالليل وهم نايمين وجاب التعابين والناس غرقت وهي نايمه في بيوتها، وازاي جاب تعابين وعقارب من الجبل. ودلوقتي لما ببص على اللي بيحصل في السودان مع الطوفان ومع الفلودز اللي بتحصل هناك، وبقول يا الله احنا بقالنا كام قرن والناس اللي حوالينا عماله تعمل مشاريع ميه واحنا في النص بنتبهدل بالطريقه دي. في شعوب المنطقه دي كلها، شعوب وادي النيل بصفه عامه، وازاي الكنترول اللي اتعمل، ازاي التحكم في النيل ليه رد فعل. بس الناس اللي بتكون ضحيه رد الفعل دي مش مهمه بالنسبه لهم. we have not just been displaced, we are always displaceable. We are displaceable, and at any time, even now, our language is displaceable, our wealth is displaceable, our identity is displaceable, and it's not just about a one-time thing. Our material heritage and antiquities are displaceable and not very important. They can be drowned, as you can see what is happening now in Nubian sites in Sudan. So اللي حصل انه النوبيين قعدوا يحاولوا يبنوا بيوتهم اعلى ويبنوا اعلى على النيل مع سنه 1902 و12 33 64. الموضوع كان بقى ما فيهوش ما فيهوش اي فرصه، لانه السد العالي كان هيبقى حاجه مهوله، والبحيره بتاعته اللي هي بحيره النوبه تسمى اعتباطا بحيره ناصر في مصر، واللي هو شيء غير يعني مقبول بالنسبه لي. زي اكن حد قتل واحد وكتب اسمه على قبره، بدل ما يكتب اسم القتيل كتب اسم القاتل على القبر. So what happens is that in the 1960s it was a nationally operated displacement efforts under a scheme called DRDR, Development Induced Displacement and Resettlement. So what happened is that the Egyptian state has decided to build New Nubian. However, we don't call it New Nubia. So Nubians refuse to call it New Nubia. We call it Tahgir, which means place of displacement. So we have this huge effort to build for what they called 50,000 Nubians. But that's not accurate, and this itself was problematic, how they moved people and made place for 50,000 people. But actually, some references refer to 113,000 people, and actually some other references that rely on census in relation to older censuses and more recent censuses, to just in relation to that, they think that there were more people there and they were undercounted so that the funding would be less. And I think they built around 12,000 houses for Nubians, displacing every single Nubian, every last Nubian village in Egypt. I have to say that there is one village in Egypt that is not displaced, at least not displaced in the recent history that I know of, which is Tengar. But other than that, I think every single Nubian village is displaced in Egypt, is not in its original location, and including Gharb Hil and Gharb Aswan that were displaced in the 1930s. I think 1902 and 1930. So there were some villages who had to move entirely, but the 1964 was a huge, one of the biggest displacement and resettlement efforts in that time in history. And the state built these beautifully, just sarcastically saying, stone houses that are supposed to be, now speaking about how architecture works now in our control, that are supposed to be called dwelling units. So ما اسمهمش بيوت، ده مش بيت، دي وحدات سكنية. الوحدة السكنية دي تتراوح ما بين 60 ل 120 متر مربع تقريبا، حاجة كده. They had four different plans, four plans that are between 60 to 120 meters square, as I remember. And that compared to a Nubian house, let me go this way, a Nubian house that starts at a whopping 500 meters square. A Nubian house can go up to 2,000 meters square. If you are on imperial system, go and convert this. See how big of a house it is if it's 2,000 meters square. I have surveyed and measured houses that big. I have been in houses where stray dogs came in, procreated, left the house, and nobody felt it because the house is so damn big. So we have this kind of style of architecture where the house doesn't make sense to a modern architect. And let me discuss with you why is that. But let me go a bit here and look at the displacement house. Of course, the displacement itself was horrible. If any التهجير نفسه كان شيء سيء جدا. لو أي حد بيسمعني نوبي من مصر أو من المناطق اللي اتهجرت في السودان، روحوا اسألوا جدتكم وحبوباتكم وكباركم دلوقتي إيه اللي حصل في التهجير، اتهجرتوا إزاي، لميتوا حاجاتكم إزاي، البيت لما رحتوا استلمتوه من الحكومة كان شكله إيه. Nubians say that when they received these houses, they were not complete. The quote I got was every 5 families there were one house, which might not be statistically accurate, but it means that there were much less houses than people, because the project was very hasty, and actually state records admit that the project was very hasty. The houses were unimaginative, and that's actually also within the state narrative. Like the researchers who work for the state has admitted that it was an unimaginative design, and the official code that it was a twist on Nubian architecture with it was Nubian architecture with a socialist twist. So that was the code for this kind of house or design. And what happened is that none of these units were left alone. Nubians had to retrofit and build around it to make it resemble a space for Nubian peoplehood to exist. The house is very important to Nubians. And do you know why our grandmothers have these really large houses? Because the Nubian house was never just a domestic space. Everything happens in a house. If there is a dispute, it turns into a court house. If there are crops, it turns into a processing facilities. If there is a wedding, it turns into a communal kitchen and an industrial kitchen. This space is designed to support political, social, and economic functions of Nubianness. This is why the Nubian house goes beyond just being a domestic space. It's not the private space that you think of. Especially, and if you have I have a photo of this, maybe I can show you. And if you have, we never closed our houses. And one of the things that we got from the state was that all these houses came with doors and locks. So the people received doors and locks, and everybody kind of made a hole in their house to have a mechanism so that people can open the door from the outside, because a lock that locks from the inside made no sense to Nubians. The house has to be accessible from the outside for everybody. There is no such a thing as, strangers cannot come into the house, because there are no strangers in the village anyways. So how architecture was really not fitting to what Nubianness is. So what ended up that if you see up there, this yellow house is what would be the typical displacement, like the dwelling unit being converted into. And if you're from the Tahrir, this is going to be very common to you. This is not how we got the house. This kind of extension, which is the mandara in most of our houses, this was added. The mustaba, in the first 3 years, every single house started building a mustaba. Nubian women, and here's the thing, literature says men owned the houses and built mastabas. That's not true. Nubian women were spearheading that effort. It's important for Nubian women to have this mastaba, because otherwise they're going to be locked into that small prison of a house. And the mastaba then acted as this kind of connector between the outside and the inside. Actually, this comparison here between the dwelling unit we received next to another Nubian house, this is one of the Nubian houses in the displacement villages. So some people were lucky enough or unlucky enough to build to have to build their houses from scratch. Usually بيسموها بيت الأهالي. ففي ناس خدت بيت من الحكومة وفي ناس بنت بيتها على الأرض from scratch. والبيت can you hear me?
Yeah, سامعاكي, but I was just going to say actually البوينت دي مهمة جدا. If you can also do just go over it بالعربي, the concept of the locked doors, but also the ownership of the house. لأنه there definitely is a shift in the understanding of that within society.
We're going to come into that big issue. My research focus is on the question of gender, or at least on investigating the question of gender. So we are going to come up into that idea again. But الفكرة هنا إنه ده الفرق ما بين بيت في التهجير الحكومة بناته وبيت في التهجير النوبيين بنوا لنفسهم. والفكرة here's the thing, البيت ده أنا اللي رافعاه، نفس عدد الناس اللي ساكنين في البيت ده هم عدد الناس اللي ساكنين في البيت ده. الاثنين البيتين بيسكنوا نفس عدد الناس. The thing is, the house does so much more than just being a dwelling. البيت هو أكبر من وحدة سكنية. البيت النوبي حاجة أكبر بكتير جدا 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 بس من وحدة سكنية. With so much variety. في سنة 33 لما الأرض الزراعية كلها طبعا غرقت. وعلى فكرة التاريخ بتاع النوبي اللي شغال في القاهرة في الخدمة ابتدى بأنه المية غرقت الأراضي الزراعية، فالناس ما بقاش عندها دخل فاضطروا يسافروا القاهرة يشتغلوا. just to link things to each other. فلما تبصي على البيت النوبي وعلى الفرايتيز اللي فيه.
واو sorry and I had the thing on mute, فما انت ما سمعتنيش لما قلت واو اول مره for the dot connecting اللي انت عملتيه دلوقتي.
So when they so it's not that we were so hoping to go work for the amazing Egyptians to make them their food and be their doormen and clean their houses. They have drowned our arable land, our agriculture. So we had to find work, and the only way to go was north. This was the only way. Actually, if you remember the also important one, the lecture on Nubian economy. If you go to the lecture on Nubian economy, you'll find that there is an evidence about shame in wage labor. Which is right, okay? but people had to do it after displacement. So قبل التهجير ما كانش حد بيشتغل عند التاني. هو عارفه لو في حد عنده فرح انت بتروحي الفرح تروحي تدوري على حاجه تعمليها، في مواعين في الحوض، في حاجه تتعمل، اي اوبريشن، حد بيبني بيت روحي شوفي روحي شوفي لك حته تليسيها، فاهمه؟ You always find a way to join in labor to make something, because people are going to join you in labor. But this idea of paying somebody to do something or being paid to do something for somebody was kind of it's true, there was this notion of shame, but because of displacement and because when we were moved into a new area we were not so accustomed with the soil, so the structure systems were kind of different to us. We had to work with builders from that area who know how to deal with that soil and with stone, because we don't have a lot of stone in our architecture.
Wow.
So things link into, it's not isolated from each other. They took our land, and they took their water took our land, or their project took our land. Then we had to go.
Their project, because it's not their water.
It's their project, yes. It's their project that took our land. It's very sad. You know why? Because how water is such an important thing in Nubian heritage. But for Egyptian Nubians, there is always this story about the metaphor of water being something easy used by children, and then having a father say, "But water is what drowned us." That easy thing that we loved so much is what took our life away from us. So it's this how a trauma and a stigma was created between us and something that we loved so much.
Absolutely.
So just to move a bit on and see then how Nubian, where's the text? Okay, the text disappeared.
Just to give you a heads up, we have 10 minutes before our next panel.
Okay. So do you want me to just go into discussion?
No, it's fine. I mean, I'm learning. I don't know about everyone else. Family, if you're tuned in, let us know if you would like to have a discussion.
So look at this. Oh, yes, please. I'm going to run and then stop, and then let's talk together, okay? With everybody and see comments and all. So you see what the Mastaba did. So this is architecture. It's not just building big things. One unit has diffused what was supposed to be a closed-in space to take out the street. You see? Mastaba is became somehow a brilliant connection from the inside and the outside. This one here this is actually a reimagination of our house and my grandmother and what happened in building and what did it mean to build. And here I would like to cite Anne Jennings when she said women were builders, right? Women were seen as the builder of the house. And I'm writing about this idea now about emotional capital, and this is a confrontation of the idea of the architect. Who is the architect? Who can be deemed an architect? A person who cares can also, the person who emotionally formulates the built environment can be also seen as an architect. And I see that in the image of my grandmother, and I'm not going to go too academic on this, and I will give you a link to my paper after. The last issue I wanted to raise is the Hassan Fathi complex. So Hassan Fathi, are you familiar with that guy, Dima?
Yes, actually, Dalia's writing. Well, she's working with him, interviewed him, and by working with him, I mean in tracing Nubian art. If it's the same Hassan Fathi, I think it is.
No. This guy died a long time ago.
No, but I've been to that. Yeah, I've been to that house. I in fact recorded the person who is now looking after it.
Yeah. So Hassan Fathi is a French educated architect.
Okay.
So he's a friend. He went to French schools, and he's a Effendi. So he's from Al-Hadar, from Masr. So he went.
Do you not find mushkila by calling it Hadar? Is that terminology نفسها مش problematic شوية?
What? Calling it حضر?
as in مش حضر. sorry انا ما اعرفش بالعربي مش حضر جايه من حضاره يعني الروت بتاعت حضاره.
No, that means urban. Just means urban.
Okay.
That's a technical. Etymologically it's just technical.
Okay.
So he's from a city. So from a city, studied in upper society French schools, and he had all these privileges. He traveled. He went to Gharb Aswan when the city Gharb Aswan was just a few decades old, and decided that this is the extension of ancient Egyptian architecture. He got so mesmerized by the vaults and domes building style that Kunuz Nubians do, which is, by the way, is not all Nubian architecture. Often, most Nubian architecture in Fadija areas are thatched, are not domed or vaulted. Usually, the theory is that this is a style that traveled from the south, so it's closer to Dungulawi architecture, or maybe architecture that has traveled up from areas like Mali, because it works in areas where there is termite. If you're thatching, termite isn't going to eat that up very easily. So anyways, he went to that village. He decided that this is Egyptian architecture. These are the carriers of ancient Egyptian architecture. And he has redefined, so he was the first person to do that, to redefine what Nubian architecture is. Use it and say, this is the architecture of the people, عمارة الإنسان, and architecture of the poor, which is another issue. Who wants to be called poor? And on the other side, he paid the respect to Nubians that's not really common within the north, in the context in the north in Egypt. So we have this complex with him, or me as a Nubian architect, as this one person who has vocalized his respect to the heritage, but he only can see it as an extension of Egyptian architecture, ancient Egyptians, which is in itself, I think, archaeologists and historians in your panel, in your other panels, can correct me if I am wrong, but I don't think it's accurate. So that's another complex. And so let me then conclude, or just I will go back to your stream with my face. How do I do that? Yeah. And tell you, here's the thing. Here's what I see is what would be a Nubian architecture, Nubian urbanism, Nubian architecture, Nubian space making, Nubian built environment. It would be the place that works for the interest of Nubians, whether it's made by Nubians by identity, Nubians by love, or people who are allies. A place that can work for the social, political, or economic interest of Nubians, and not have them sidelined or getting the crumbs of it. While we are so aware that what our interest is, what do we want Nubianness to be? And this is why it's such a complex question. So what do we want our Nubianness to be? If we get our land, what do we want to build? Because here's the thing, we're not going to build the same houses, and we shouldn't, because the houses that were built in the 60s were not the same houses that were there in the 1860s. Nubians have developed, Nubians have grown. We cannot get stuck in history. We need to grow in the trajectory, just like how our ancestors grew. The Nubian architecture in antiquity is not the same as my grandmother's house, right? So what do we want to build? How do we serve our interest through architecture? And how do we make sure that nobody takes our identity, commodifies it, makes money out of it, while we are dispossessed and don't have the resources to make a built environment for ourselves? And I'm going to shut up now and see. I know we have like 2 minutes. Maybe you have comments, and maybe somebody wants to say something.
I'll just run through the comments. And by all means, this is central to being Nubian, beyond borders and beyond boundaries. This will, as we said yesterday in our little teaser, it will continue on to the next panel. So please do stay with us. We have another hour discussing this and dissecting it further. I'm very excited to say we'll have our brother and hopefully some sisters from the Nubian Kenyan community joining us to add to their perspective, and hopefully they can share some photos with us as well, on being Nubia Unbound, basically. But let me go through some of these comments really quick. Abu Ziko Ahmed says برنامج جميل شكرا, great program, thank you Abu Ziko. سعد المصري says منا بجد أنا عاشق لمقالاتك البحثية كلها, انتي باحثة متميزة بجد, برافو عليكي بجد. Your work was referenced more than once in these in these panels. Shamim Nassar says the art is gorgeous. Yes. Saad Al-Masri says تنجار.
He's from تنجار. عاش أحسن ناس.
and شميم
احسن ناس. انا ببقى عايزه اقول للناس يروحوا تنجار, بس مش عايزه حد يروح تنجار عشان ما يبوظوهاش.
We just got a really serious, a long comment. But Shamim Nassar is asking, Minna, how can we get access to some of your publications? If you can drop some of your maybe your academia link or something.
They're all open access. They're all open access.
Can you put the link in private? Can you put the link in private chat now so I can drop it for you?
There are a bunch of them. It's going to take me a while to bring out all the papers.
Okay, come back to this panel. We will put them in the comments, and hopefully as well we will tweet them out if you are joining us from Twitter. We have Abdurrahman Muhammad here saying, I think as scientific methodology or defining Nubian architecture, we should look at architecture in other original Nubian regions, not northern areas only, such as Medob and Darfur and Ajang and Kordofan.
Yes. Exactly.
I read in these cultures and found that old Nubian architecture can be well preserved in isolated regions, not affected by external influences, unlike the northern ones who are influenced by pharaohs, Greeks, Romans, Turks, and Europeans. We have to keep looking.
Here's the thing. I agree with the first section. I disagree with the second section. The first section is about purity. The thing is, even the secluded ones now were affected by other culture. Being affected by other cultures is so important in the growth of a civilization. So we need to be affected to our interest. So we need to pick and choose what works for us to be affected, and that would be Nubian. So I agree. You cannot define Nubian architecture by looking at northern architecture because there are so many variations that would look so stark, but both are Nubian, both are working for Nubian interest, both are accommodating Nubianness. However, we cannot also say there is purity in it. We need to find a pure Nubian architecture. You know why? Because pure cannot be contaminated by innovation. And we need to innovate. Purity is not going to work for our interests. It's lovely to keep the record as an archaeologist, but I am an architect who looks to make places for people who are already living and their children in the next 100 years. So yeah, this would be my
the comment you're saying links very nicely with what Vincent was saying yesterday about the language, because someone raised an issue. Isn't Nubian language and the characters, doesn't that have Coptic and Greek influences, that we need something that is just strictly or solely Nubian? And the case that Vincent was making is that you can look at that, but then you are completely disassociating it from something that it's already. Okay, let me just say, because الثاني session الثاني will get deactivated. Please, I see a lot of you tuned in to the live right now. If you just refresh the page of wherever you are in, we will take exactly 2 minutes to hop over to the next room or the broadcasting studio, and we will be back with the panel Nubia Unbound. Being Nubian beyond boundaries and borders, and we have more people joining us, so please hop over to that panel and let's continue the conversation there. That discussion is an open discussion. If you would like to join us there, please just come to the comments and say that you would like to come on screen and we will send you the link. Thank you so much. Arwa says, please let us know before you go online again. I'm missing all this beauty. Shukran minna so much, so informative, wallahi. And Rushdi Abdelmenam Ibrahim sends a heart. Arwa, lots of love. We will let you know. Stay tuned. Naharda, we have 8 hours, 8 continuous hours of all things Nubia, all things beautiful, all things our heritage and culture. Okay, we will say Afia Logo right now, and please refresh the page. Come back to the Nubia Fest page on Facebook, the Nubia Initiative, or if you're on Twitter, on YouTube, just go to the next panel. We will be live momentarily. Thank you so much. Minna, thank you for this, and we continue in Nubia Unbound. Afia Logo.